Now, the second figure that we see on horseback, of course, is this knight who's half knight, half monk. He has clothing of both. But you're going to find find out very quickly that he is mostly the knight half. And they call this person a Knight Templar, or a Templar Knight. And so there was a group of Templar Knights that went to the Holy Land, and they fought the Saracens, who were the Turks, Muslim warriors in the Holy Land, and they fought over Jerusalem and the cities of Palestine. And remember, this was during the Crusades. And so these are men who were fighters, but they were also had taken a holy vow to serve Christ as knights. So it's an interesting mix of what we would call a holy vow, someone who's vowed to serve Christ, but also to be a knight and protect those values of knighthood. Now, a couple things that we need to know is this is happening about the year 1200 AD, and there was no Bible in the hands of the people. Can you tell? There was no Bible in the hands of the people. And I think you can tell because there's a lot of show. There's a lot of external, and no one quotes Scripture. There's not much knowledge of what the Bible teaches because there's no Bible in the hands of people at this point. So it's only in the hands of the clergy, and there was no knowledge, not knowledge of what the Word really taught. And so, because of that, the church, and you can see the corruption here, you have a head of a monastic or a monastery that has many monks, and he's really conflicted. He's compromised. He's got these wealthy attributes, and then he seems to be doing good works, helping people to try to kind of gloss over his own sins. So there's kind of a disconnect here. Next week, we're going to see more about this knight. We're going to be getting a picture of the banquet hall of Rotherwood, where Cedric the Saxon lives. And you're going to notice that one of the things that Sir Walter Scott does in his book is he gives much description. His description is really intense. You're going to see, just as we've seen with the clothing that the knight wears and that Prior Eimer wear, you get examples of all these things, very descriptive. So, for instance, for the prior, he has a forest green jacket, he has a fur collar, a gold necklace, and bracelets. And he goes on and on describing his external dress. And part of that is because that's part of his style, but part of it is he's trying to help you really see the kind of person that these men are. Let's go now to our plot section for the elements. And these, again, we see the plot taking place. Two men, Prior Eimer and the Templar Knight, come riding up with this entourage. There's a total of 10 riders, and they come up and they right up, and here's a great quote for the plot. So if you would copy this in your notes. So we can see that very descriptive, that he tells all about how he wrote up, what he was writing. He talks about the companions. And on page 18 of this section, we see what the abbot says. He says, "Tush," said the abbot, "thou canst tell us, if thou wilt. This reverend brother has been all his life engaged in fighting among the Saracens for the recovery of the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb of Jesus. He is of the order of Knights Templars, whom you may have heard of. He is half monk, half soldier." So there's a very telling section there. And we find out that his name, the name of this Templar knight, is Brian de Bois Guilbert. Brian, this is Knight Brian. We see this is on page 19. And the prior continues. He says, "Mary, brother Brian." Remember, Mary is another word for truly, or indeed, brother Brian, replied the prior, touching the one of them. "It were hard for me to render a reason for a fool speaking according to his folly. And the other churl is that of a savage." And so he's talking about Wamba and Girth. Now he's talking about Girth now. He's saying that other savage is a fierce, intractable race, some of whom, as I have told you, are still to be found among the descendants of the conquered Saxons. So Girth has a hatred of the Normans. And notice it says here on page 19, the Saxons, some of them had a supreme pleasure, it is to testify by all means in their power their aversion to their conquerors. So the Saxons hated their conquerors. Now let's go down to the bottom of 19. "Aye, but," answered Prior Eimer, "every land has its own manners and fashions. And besides, that beating this fellow could procure us no information respecting the road to Cedric's house. It would have been sure to have established a quarrel betwixt you and him had we found our way thither. Remember what I told you." And now he's going to talk about Cedric. So we have this also on page 19, kind of a introduction of Cedric the Saxon. And that's a D, Cedric, page 19. Look what he says. "This wealthy franklin," he's a franklin, he's wealthy. He says, "This wealthy franklin is proud. He is fierce. He is jealous and irritable, a withstander of the nobility, and even of his neighbors Reginald Front de Boeuf and Philip Malvoisin, who are no babes to strive with. He stands up so sternly for the privileges of his race, and is so proud of his uninterrupted descent from Hereward, a renowned champion of the Heptarchy, that he is universally called Cedric the Saxon, and makes a boast of his belonging to a people from whom many others endeavor to hide their descent." So we see that he has a great deal of pride of being a Saxon. So we can see this pride that he has. Now, if we look at page 20, the Templar turns to Prior Eimer and says, "Prior Eimer," said the Templar, "you are a man of gallantry, learned in the study of beauty, and as expert as a troubadour in all matters concerning the arets of love. But I shall expect much beauty in this celebrated Rowena, to counterbalance the self-denial and forbearance which I must exert if I am to court the favor of such a seditious churl as you have described her father Cedric. So here we begin to see the very first mention of the beautiful Rowena, who Brian thinks is the daughter of Cedric. But look at the next paragraph. We're on page 20. Cedric is not her father, replied the prior, and is but a remote relation. She is descended from higher blood than even he pretends to, and is constantly connected with him by birth, and is but distantly connected with him by birth. Her guardian, however, he is. So, Rowena has this guardian. It's not her father, but it is Cedric, and she's the guardian. He is her guardian. So, the guardian, Cedric, takes care of her, provides for her. Okay, and then as these writers progress, and we see that Brian has a very strong interest in meeting this beautiful woman who's known to be the beautiful Rowena. We see that they are trying to head to Rotherwood, and so that way they can spend the night. There's a storm that's coming up, and they want to their hope is to miss this storm that's brewing. So they come up upon Girth and Wamba, and they say, head down the road, and there's this half-sunken cross. So this cross is sunken down in the ground. There's only half of it that you can see, and they give directions from that cross. And so as the story unfolds, and this is the plot, of course, they go down the road, and they're trying to get to Rotherwood as fast as they can. And there they come to the cross, and they cannot remember if they're going to go to the left or if they're going to go right. There's an argument there. What did Girth actually tell them? But there's a palmer. Now, a palmer is a person from the Holy Land who carries a palm, and it's like a pilgrim who travels from place to place, but he's got a palm, and he's made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. So it's kind of a holy person, maybe returning from a pilgrimage. And this palmer is laying at the foot of this cross. He's laying at the base or the foot of the cross. And he's wakened up, and let's see what he says down here. Because they ask him, where are you from? And at the very bottom of page 22, this is near the end of chapter 2, he responds, I was born a native of these parts, answered their guide. And as he made the reply, they stood before the mansion of Cedric, a low, irregular building containing several courtyards or enclosures, extending over a considerable space of ground, and which, though its size argued the inhabitant to be a person of wealth, differed entirely from the tall, turreted, and castellated buildings in which the Norman nobility resided. So, Cedric's Rotherwood, which the palmer has helped them to come upon, is very different from the Norman buildings. The Norman buildings have these real tall turrets, and you guys, I'm sure you've seen turreted buildings before. They've got little slit holes, several stories high, and then castellated walls. That's these little castellations that shelter arrow, archers that can shoot arrows, and so there's these turreted buildings, and of course drawbridges and a moat that are very typical of the Norman style. So it very much looks like a fortification. A castle is a fortification. Now Rotherwood looks very different. It's on the top of a hill or a rise, and it's a low building. It's got straw roof. And we're going to go into that next week, but you're going to begin to see the difference between the Saxons, who did not have any of these big fortified buildings, and the Normans, who bring these fortified castles from Europe across the Channel when they conquer England. And so you get the idea, see, that the Normans really are for greatly protecting themselves and making sure that they're safe, and that there's also a statement the Normans are making. The Normans are making a statement. We are in control. If you got a problem with that, attack our castle and be defeated. And so the Saxons are very much aware of that all the time. Now, let's look at Rotherwood. This will be our last little section that we're going to kind of dwell on today. So on page 23, the very last two paragraphs of chapter 2, Rotherwood was not, however, without defenses. No habitation in that disturbed period could have been so without the risk of being plundered and burnt before the next morning. So in other words, this is a very dangerous period. Let's write down there in your notes, a dangerous period. There was much robbing. There was much roving bands of robbers and people that would attack your building. In fact, it's saying here that if you didn't have your building fortified, your home fortified, you would be attacked. So let's take a look, because here's a description of their of what they have for defense. A deep fosse or ditch was drawn around the whole building and filled with water from a neighboring stream. A double stockade or palisade, composed of pointed beams, which the adjacent forest supplied, defended the outer and inner bank of the trench. There was an entrance from the west to the outer stockade, which communicated by a drawbridge with a similar opening in the interior defenses. Some precautions had been taken to place those entrances under the protection of projecting angles by which they might be flanked in case of need by archers or slingers. Before this entrance, the Templar wound his horn loudly, for the rain, which had long threatened, began now to descend with great violence. So let's just give kind of a sketch of what's happening here at the home of Cedric, this home called Rotherwood. And we have this big house. We're going to go into more description next week, and it's kind of on a hill, but there's a river that flows by. We're kind of looking down at it like a bird's eye view. The river flows by, and water from that river is taken out, and it fills a ditch that goes all the way around this structure. So they've created a moat, basically, that goes and protects. So this ditch has probably very slow-moving water, and it re-enters the river down on the other side of the building. Now it says that there's on the outer bank of this fosse, this is the French word, fosse, which means ditch, there's a series of stakes, pointed stakes. I'm putting them in. They're on the outer bank, and they're probably gathered together or even tied together. So you have these staked structures. So it probably looks a bit like a frontier fort in America, where you have the trees that are sharpened and just a wall, like a log wall. So they have that on the outside edge, of the bank, but they also have another one on the inside. So this inside ring surrounds the house as well. So there's two of these fences. Now, it says that the fence is on the inside, and then, of course, there's a moat. And then on the outside area, there's another fence of logs, these tall, sharpened stakes. And then it says, of course, Rotherwood sits inside the building, and then it has a drawbridge that comes down and plops across the fosse. And so the fosse is really protecting the house, and here's where a gate, this drawbridge, draws down, and people come in. It's pulled back up, so there's a gap in the outer gate for people to come through, and then they have to cross this drawbridge, and then they go through the gap as they come in. So that's kind of the weak point. The weak point of this structure is where they have to let people in and out. And of course there they have this drawbridge. Now the second thing that they have is they said they have projecting points of the wall that kind of project out so they can angle in with archers and protect that gateway. So let's show kind of that idea here with just our little remaining area that we've got. If we were looking down as a bird would look down, and we say that we have a gate and a fence that goes around, it would have a projecting area here and a projecting area of the wall here, and then the gate goes around Rotherwood. Here's the house of Rotherwood. We're looking down on it again. And of course you have this road or a path that comes in. Now think about that. Here's where you have your drawbridge. Your drawbridge pulls down across this ditch. Here's the ditch that goes around the structure. You have a drawbridge that comes down. But look, if you station on this log wall, if you were to station archers right up here or archers right over here, because it's projecting outward, they would have a good shot. In fact, there would be two different directions that they would pound people who are coming in through that gate. So that's what they're doing. They have projecting this projected point. Here's a point and another point over here that stick out, and so the archers can fire in on the gate a lot easier. So it's not a straight wall with a gate in the middle. It's got 2 points, 2 projections, and then they can protect it. So we see that the whole idea here is for protection. So that's how it's laid out. It's on top of a hill. It has a moat or a fosse, and the idea is to protect. So it's got to be a very dangerous time to have those kind of defenses around a person's home. And we'll stop here because next week we get to see one of my favorite passages, the entrance of Brian de Bois Guilbert, the Knight Templar, and Prior Eimer into the banquet hall of Cedric. And that's chapter 3, so you may want to look that over. It's a wonderful chapter. It's pretty exciting to learn. And as we learn a lot of history, a lot of English heritage along with this very important novel.